It feels like this has been the longest run up to a draft that I can remember, but it's finally here. So I'm excited about it. It's a unique draft with all the quarterbacks potentially going in the top 10. Creates a lot of excitement, and we've already had some trades. I think we're going to see more. So it's going to be a fun draft. I'm looking forward to getting out to Cleveland on Sunday and really taking it all in there for the whole week. It should be an exciting time for everyone. So with that, I'm ready to go. Just fire away.
Matt Mayako.
Daniel, I noticed that you have Mac Jones as your 32nd ranked prospect, but yet you have him going number 3 overall to the 49ers. Can you walk us through that process of, where the disparity is between your feelings and then what you believe the 49ers feelings are, and maybe as specific as you can get, why do you think the 49ers are so high on Mac Jones, whereas you surely are not?
Sure. First of all, thanks for not mentioning that the Giants are ahead of the Padres right now, Matt. I appreciate you. No, look, to me, that's the difference, right? It's the difference between creating your own list, how you stack the players, how you rank them, how you view them, versus a mock draft, which is projecting where you think these guys are going to go. And the challenge that I have is that I'm not scouting for a team. I don't have coaches coming in and saying, this is what we value. This is, if we could tailor our team towards what we really want to do here, this is going to help us rank our board. So I'm scouting for a generic team that doesn't exist. So I'm going to be a little more inclined to take the guys with more upside that I think fits in more places that can do more things. I don't think Matt Jones fits all 32 teams. I don't think he fits all the teams that are in the quarterback market, but I understand why the 49ers value what he does, because this is really an opportunity for San Francisco to duplicate what Mac Jones had at Alabama, which is you have a really good offensive line. You've got guys that can win one-on-one matchups all over the field, and you've got a very creative play caller that's going to find those matchups and then rely on an accurate, efficient quarterback to function in that system. Well, that's not every other team doesn't have all those things in place, so they're not going to value Mac the way Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch might value him. So that's a little bit of where that disconnect is. I think he would, look, if he goes to the 49ers, he's going to play well. He's going to be a really good player there. To me, I just have him behind those other quarterbacks when I rank them in terms of their ability. Personally, I always like to, interject there. This is what I think is going to happen. It looks like it points towards Mac Jones. But if I was there, even with the, knowing how much they value the things that Mac's good at, I would still take Trey Lance, because I think Trey's going to eventually get to the point where he can deliver all the things that Mac can deliver in terms of being able to process very quickly, make great decisions, and you're going to be able to do more with him in terms of getting him on the move. Now, right now, accuracy wise, he trails Mac Jones, but I think there's some mechanical things that you can fix with him, much like we saw, with Josh Allen. And I think you could see Trey Lance get to that level. So that's what I would do. But what I believe they will do is Mac Jones.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Paul Domowich. Paul, you may ask your question.
The Eagles obviously need corner help in this draft. They hired a new defensive coordinator who, assuming Indianapolis has rubbed off on him, is going to use a lot of zone coverage, much more than Schwartz did last year. As a former scout, how does that influence the way that you evaluate the corner class, and might it influence their view of the top corners in this class with respect to, like, maybe Newsome and Samuel go up higher on their board than they would if somebody else was their defensive coordinator?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Obviously, your scheme is going to inform how you stack the players and what they'll do for you. I think Asante Samuel is one of those guys who's a lot of teams are high on, and maybe he hasn't got as much buzz. He doesn't fit everyone. But again, if you want to play off and let him just see the field, see through the receiver to the quarterback and drive and make plays, he's going to be coveted. So I think it's a good point to me when you look at that defense with the Colts and you kind of go back through that scheme and trace it back through Marinelli. That scheme was more front dependent than coverage dependent. So that's why, to me, I could see them going with an edge rusher. If the Eagles were going to move around, which with Howie, you always know that's an opportunity. Even he's at 12, I don't know if he's going to stay there. He's going to go up or down again. If he goes up, you could make a case for somebody like a Pitts on the offensive side. But to me, if they slide down in the draft, it's going to point more towards the edge rush and trying to get some more young guys in there. I like Sweat. He's going to be a good player, but Brandon's getting a little bit older. And so finding another guy there, I think that defense is more front to back driven than back to front driven.
Our next question comes from Dave Burkett with the Detroit Free Press. Dave, you may ask your question.
Just, it seems like teams are maybe moving on quicker than ever from quarterbacks. I don't know if you sense that too, but what is your theory for maybe why that is? And also, what do you think that means for a team's appetite for risk in taking a quarterback? As in, if it's easy to move on from a guy after 3 years or whatever, if it's more acceptable, are GMs more apt to roll the dice on a guy in round one?
Yeah, that's a good point, Dave. Good to see you, man. To me, it's not as cost prohibitive as it used to be, right? So you don't have these monster rookie contracts that you're committed to the long term. You have a lot more turnover in terms of head coaches and GMs. That cycle has been shrunk. So teams have been, okay, we're not married to a guy. It used to be you had the GM, the head coach, and the quarterback in place for a long period of time. And whatever their warts were, these were our guys, and we're going to roll with them and try and build around them. And now when you have so much turnover, these coaches and GMs are not married to these quarterbacks. They walk into the room and they're like, this wasn't my guy. I want to go get my guy. So that's part of it. You're not going to have the penalties financially that you would have in years past. And I think, to me, like the kind of the turning point was with Arizona, when you could say, man, we just took Josh Rosen, and 1 year later we just said, nope, we're cutting it and running, and we're going to upgrade the position. And if we feel like there's an opportunity to upgrade, we would do it at every other position, but forever we wouldn't do it at quarterback. You'd say, wow, he's good enough, but man, you're always trying to get better at the other positions. It only makes more sense you try and get better at that one. So I think it's just been a total shift over the last couple of years, and I don't think it's going away. That's why, to me, I think we identify who the teams are that are in the quarterback market. But when you really look at it and you say, well, if you think you can just get this much better, then might be more teams in the quarterback market than we all know.
Next question comes from Eric DeLalla with the Denver Broncos. Eric, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, if you're Denver, how do you weigh Drew Lock's potential versus these quarterback prospects? And then out of Lance, Fields, and Jones, which of those, if any, do you think would constitute an upgrade there?
Yeah, I would have Lance and Fields just based off kind of the evaluation process. I would have Lance and Fields ahead of where Drew Lock was coming in. I would have Drew Lock over Mac Jones, personally. And look, that's when they were coming through the draft process. And I know Drew's had some ups and downs, but you see the flashes of what he can do. I mean, he's got a ton of ability. So if you're asking me, if they're sticking and picking and they're picking there at number 9 and either Lance or Fields were there, even though you have some other areas, and even though you can make a case, let's give Drew Lock a little more time, I couldn't pass up either of those guys if they were to get there to number 9 and personally. So that's where he would stack in for me. If it was him versus Mac Jones, while I think Mac has been a little more accurate and maybe a little bit more consistent, I think I would still dream on what Drew Lock can be and probably stick with him if that were to be the decision.
Next question comes from Brian Costello with the New York Post. Brian, you may ask your question.
Just curious, the Jets' second first-round pick at number 23. Just want to get your thoughts on where you see them going there. And I would think you'd put cornerback as a possibility there. Are there any corners that fit Robert Saleh's defense, you think, better than others at that spot? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think you could say Greg Newsome. It makes some sense there at 23 out of Northwestern, who's somebody that's, just long and rangy and can really play the football, which is going to fit pretty much any scheme. But obviously that's what, Saleh is accustomed to, having those bigger guys. So he would make sense there. I think you kind of look at 3 places, in my opinion. You've got the corners you can look at. You might be kind of an in-between spot there, so that could be a trade back a little bit, and maybe you look at somebody like that. You've got the edge rushers, which I think that's a pretty good spot for an edge rusher if you're interested in one. I think you'll see that, between 15 and 25, I think, via teams moving around, I think that's when you're going to see a bunch of these edge rushers go. So they're going to be right in the mix of the edge rushers, whether that's a guy like Ojulari, Greg Rousseau, see what happens with Phillips. Those would be opportunities there. But I mean, those are the defensive opportunities for me. If you're trying to put yourself in that situation, this whole draft would be about Zach Wilson for me. at least early on, we're going to devote as many resources as we can to give him the opportunity that Sam didn't have, which is to have some good people in front of him and a lot of options of where to go with the football. So, you look at pick 23 offensive line wise, if somehow Vera Tucker were to get there, that's a home run of all home run picks. Darisaw is somebody that's interesting. So they've got a bunch of different ways that they can go. It's a good news, bad news, right? The bad news is you got a bunch of needs. The good news is you got a bunch of picks. So they're going to be able to go in different directions depending on how it falls.
Next question comes from Nate Ulrich with the Akron Beacon Journal.
My question is about Christian Barmore. I think in your latest mock, you didn't have him going in the first round. What do you think about the range where you expect him to get picked, pros and cons for him? And then did the Browns releasing Sheldon Richardson do anything for you last year as a potential landing spot? Last week.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I think he could sneak into the back end of one. I think more than likely he goes in round two. Like he fits the profile of what traditionally are the second round guys. And that he's a little bit of a boom bust player where you have high highs and then you've got some inconsistent lower lows. At Alabama, some of the stuff that he had to do at Alabama, I don't know if that suited him as well. To me, he's more of an upfield guy. Let him use his athleticism to attack an edge and work upfield. Asking him to kind of play blocks and hang in there, that's really not his style, even though he's a big guy at 6'4", 310. So to me, he's a three technique who's got some real athleticism to jump in gaps, get upfield and go. So that to me kind of, it puts him for me in the second round mix. I think he's my 42nd player. So that's kind of where I have him. Would I be shocked if he were to go, Browns are 26 and say, is that a big reach? No, I don't think that's a big reach. If you feel like he fits what you do. But I think there is some risk involved. There's some games where he just kind of disappears. So the ability is there. But that's kind of where I have him.
Was that a ho-hum move for you, or did that raise your eyebrows at all when they cut Richards?
No, I didn't. It didn't register as a big time move there. The challenge is in this draft, which is so light at defensive tackle. I call it is what it is. It's the worst defensive tackle group that I've seen since I started in 2003. I mean, I've got two guys really, when you talk about Barmore and Onwuzurike, like whatever order you want to put those in, I have Onwuzurike, but those are the only two guys that I would be fired up in the first 75, 80 picks. So it's just a really thin year. So maybe it was eye raising just from that standpoint, knowing that there's not a lot of reinforcements coming.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Howard Eskin. Howard, you may ask your question.
Daniel, it's good to see you again. And I'm concentrating on the Eagles.
Yeah.
If Smith, Waddle, and Surtain are there at 12, who would you take, and who do you think the Eagles will take? And then I have a quarterback question right after that.
Yeah, that's a good question, Howard. Good to see you, bud. I don't know. There's a bad pick. I don't know that you make a pick there and say that's this player wasn't worthy of that pick. Now, selfishly, just how I would stack them up. I know they took a receiver last year with Rager, and I know you don't want to keep going back to those types of positions in the first round. You want to build at the more premier positions, which corner would outrank wide receiver. But I would take Waddle. He's too intriguing to me with what he can do in a league where you need explosive plays. He gives those to you. He's going to take a lot of pressure off the quarterback. He's going to have an influence on the run game as well. Anything that you might have liked about Jalen Rager, Jalen Waddle does all those things infinitely better. So to me, at least you put him out there. You hope Rager grows and continues to grow. And now you got a track team when you have those two guys out there because they can both fly. So that would be the way I would go. But again, I like Devontae Smith. He's ranked right behind him. They're 5 and 6 on my list. And Surtain's my top corner. So I don't know. That's just, comes down to what they want to do. I would say if I'm guessing what they would do in that situation, I would say that would be hard for them to go receiver in back-to-back years. I would guess they would go corner. I would take Waddle.
All right. Today at their pre-draft meeting, Nick Sirianni wouldn't commit to Jalen Hurts as his quarterback. Is that just lip service by Nick Sirianni, or would you have questions about Jalen Hurts?
Well, I mean, Jalen hasn't proven a lot. So, I don't know that it's insulting or something like that he's not named the starting quarterback. And I think the other thing that about Jalen, if you've done, you talk to the people at Alabama, you talk to the people at Oklahoma, and you talk to everybody in Philadelphia last year, he's incredibly competitive. So that I have no problem with lighting a little bit of a fire there and saying, hey, you don't have anything right now. You've got to come in, you've got to earn it. It's a new coaching staff. I don't think that's out of the ordinary.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
Enjoy it.
Next question comes from Mark Maskey with the Washington Post. Mark, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, one big picture question. As we get to the end of this process, obviously it's the second straight year that the whole pre-draft process has been conducted under some very unusual circumstances through the pandemic. How do you think the comfort level and the confidence in the evaluations and the medical information compares this year to last year and then versus a normal year?
I think the biggest deal is the medical information. Last year, as weird as it was, we got the combine in. So you had 330 plus guys that had good medical. This year, you only end up having 150 guys go to Indy, and several players, with COVID or other reasons, you had some key players that didn't make it there. So you've got incomplete medical information on these guys, and nothing scares a general manager more than not having the medical, to the point where you're scrambling. You might have a guy that kind of pops up out of nowhere late in the process, and you'd be trying to get him in. You would save some of your 30 visits, right? You're allowed, used to bring in 30 guys into the building. You would save a couple of those for these quote unquote pop-up guys that had great pro days. So you could bring them in and get your physicals on them, because you weren't going to pick them. You wouldn't pick them if you didn't have a physical on a player. Well, the math doesn't work out. When you look at the number of picks and you look at the number of physicals, there's going to be a lot of guys that get picked this year that teams are not comfortable with medically. And that's why I think you're going to see teams very willing to part with late picks in this draft to move up in rounds, 3 and 4 and all the way up into round 2. And you're going to see teams comfortable with trading some, picks this year for picks next year, just because once we get to the back half of the draft, you're literally flying blind on these kids medically.
And what about the non-medical side? Do you think the confidence is down considerably from on the football evaluations? Or not?
Well, I think it's, with the opt-out guys is different, right? That's all unique. But for the most part, most of the opt-out guys did really well at their pro days, showed up in shape. And I think teams have got to the point where outside a few, they're pretty comfortable with that. And then the rest of it, even though it was a shortened season, you got a chance to see these guys run around a little bit, at least the D1 guys. So the people that it would impact are the opt-outs, and then, some of the non-Division I players that didn't have a season this year. But even some of those key guys, like I'll take, Ellerson and Spencer Brown, right, from Northern Iowa. Those guys didn't have a season, but they went to the Senior Bowl. So we've seen them on the field, relatively recently in pads and seen them move around. So to me, the football side of it's people aren't freaked out about the football side of the evaluation. People are majorly freaked out about the medical stuff.
Next question comes from Phil Perry. Phil, you may ask your question.
Thanks, Andrew. Daniel, thanks for doing this. I wanted to ask you about Trey Lance. You mentioned him off the top of the call when I think you were asked about Mac Jones. But could you tell us what you understand were some of the responsibilities that were put on his shoulders in that offense at North Dakota State? How rare maybe some of those responsibilities were? And up in here, up here in Boston, we're wondering if he's a fit for the Patriots. So maybe could you just tell us how you might envision that match?
Yeah, I mean, he had responsibility in terms of protections. He had responsibility in terms of checks. So he had a lot more on his plate than most guys, especially, in his as a first-year starter. They put a lot more on those guys. And then just the variety of offense that they ran, being under center a lot for one thing, which you just don't see much anymore in college football. A lot of play action back to the defense, those things, full progression reads. So he's played in a complex, complicated system where he had a good amount of responsibility on his shoulders. And so even though the starts are what they are, you got 17 starts to work off of, The guy is what we know, like, is irrefutable. He's built like a brick house, so he's going to be durable. He's going to add to your running game because you can use some design quarterback run game, which he's built to handle. He's incredibly intelligent, and that's, I've spent time with him, and I've talked to a bunch of teams that have spent time with him and have been kind of blown away through the interview process with him. The character, the work ethic, all that stuff is exceptional from everybody that you talk to there at North Dakota State. So all those things, like, we know going in, he's got all that stuff. Now there's some mechanical things he can work on, and some of it just like he bounces on his toes a little bit when he gets to the top of his drop, and then he'll sink before he throws, and you'll see it impact his accuracy. Like, that stuff's all fixable. John Beck and those guys have been working on that. He's going to be able to clean that stuff up. So everything you have, you love. And the things that aren't maybe where you want them are all correctable. So that's why I'm like, I'm in. I know the limited number of games. I get all that. But when you have a guy with this skill set, and then you match the skill set with the intelligence that he has, he's going to figure it out. I firmly believe it. So would he be a fit for the Patriots? Heck yes.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it, man.
Yep.
Next question comes from Larry Mayer with the Bears. Larry, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, you mentioned Greg Newsome earlier briefly. You have him, I believe, in your latest mock draft going to the Bears. What do you like about him as a player? And you also mentioned that they may go offensive tackle. So who would be some of the offensive tackles that would be available at that spot in the first round of number 20?
Yeah, for Newsome, we'll start there. I mean, he's a really loose, fluid athlete. So you start there. His movement stuff is phenomenal. He's got, incredible ball skills. He can find and play the ball, which to me is like the number one non-negotiable, for me at that position. You've got to be able to find and play the ball. He does that really well. The only knock when you watched him on tape was like, okay, I'm questioned, like, just how much pure juice does he have? How much top speed? He wasn't really challenged vertically in any of the games that I studied. So I was curious about that. And he goes and runs 4.38. So he answered the bell on that one. The one thing in talking to teams that they have, concerned about, and you put it in the negative column, it's just he's missed a lot of games. So he's missed some games in just about every year. So from the durability standpoint, he gets dinged a little bit, but everything else checks out. And then everything I've heard about the kid, he's a great kid. So you're in good shape there. When you get to the tackles, that could be there. I mean, it's an interesting group of guys. You're talking about probably Darisaw would be one you'd be staring out there. One that I think I'm going to move him up in my final ranking. He's at 41 for me. He'll probably end up in the early 30s, but Dylan Radins from North Dakota State. When you go to this part of the process, I go back, I'm trying to get organized for the draft. So I'm just plugging in all my notes and making sure I have it all, dialed in and ready to go. And you kind of go back through it and you're like, man, this guy reads really well. The way he moves, he's really smart and instinctive. He's tough. He's good in the run game. He had a great Senior Bowl week. So Dylan Radins from North Dakota State's one of those guys. I could see him, maybe going up there a little bit higher than we had initially expected. Now, is that a little bit early, maybe where the Bears are? Yeah, maybe you trade back a little bit, but he's an intriguing player.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Kiana Martin with the 49ers. Kiana, you may ask your question.
Hey, sorry to beat a dead horse here, but you talk about Mac Jones and his fit with the 49ers and how he could succeed there. But given Kyle Shanahan's ability to handpick his own quarterback, what's your thoughts on the 49ers being able to look for that perfect fit for their offense compared to maybe what we've seen with the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes being able to adjust your offense to the quarterback?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Kiana. And I think that's the decision that they have to make. The thing that's interesting is Kyle has, that recent history of saying, I've been in 2 Super Bowls, probably should have won 2 Super Bowls, running this offense and operating it with this style of quarterback. And if not for, if Garoppolo doesn't miss a throw, if Matt Ryan doesn't take a sack, then, maybe he's got 2 Super Bowl rings to verify that this is the right guy, the right type of player for, to run this offense, and we can win the ultimate prize. I think with Andy Reid, Andy had so much success, but had never, hadn't been able to finish the deal. And the one Super Bowl experience he did have was with Favre. So I think in the back of his mind, he knew, as good as this offense is, with, an efficient, accurate quarterback, man, if I can get somebody with that next level of ability, this can go to a whole new level. And so I always thought the Favre thing was in the back of Andy's mind, and he found that obviously, and maybe more with Patrick Mahomes. So that's why I'm intrigued to see what Kyle could do with somebody like a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields. But he's had so much recent success and come so close to winning Super Bowls with a different, with his, the regular style of quarterback, that Mac Jones fits into that perfectly. So that to me is the decision. Do you want to try and believe in what you've always done and continue down that path, or do you want to try and see where this can go from here, which does come with some risk, but that's the ultimate decision they have to make.
Thanks, DJ.
Sure.
Next question comes from Mark Goffigan with the Buffalo News. Mark, you may ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Just Bills at 30. I know in your last mock you had them at Joe Tryon. Just do you think the edge rusher run could miss them, or could end before their pick? And who do you like at 30 for Buffalo? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's kind of where that edge rush group is. And there's some intrigue with that. You kind of have that group with Kwity Paye up there. Jalen Phillips is all going to be dependent on, where teams are with him with stuff off the field, because on the field, he's a top 10 pick. So that will determine where he goes. He's got a wide range of where he could come off the board. You've got Ojulari, like that kind of is that first group there. Rousseau took on a little bit of water after his pro day. I'm sticking with him. I still believe in him. I really like him. But around the league, I think he's kind of somebody that's going to fall towards the back of one, maybe into the top of two. So he could be in the mix there for Buffalo. The other thing, I think Buffalo, I would not rule out with them. Go on the defensive side of the ball and just continue to work around the edges, continue to add talent in the secondary. That wouldn't surprise me. You can't have too many corners. But Tryon to me is like that. He's right in the fairway. I think he'll be there when they pick. I think he fits. I think he's a really good player. If you wanted to trade back and still go defense and you wanted to find an edge rusher, I think Peyton Turner probably goes off early in the second round from Houston, who's another one who would give him some intriguing edge rush opportunities there. I think they'll get a tight end at some point in time, but I don't think there's going to be one that they're going to take there at 30.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Eric Smith with the Vikings. Eric, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, I guess what would your pitch be to Vikings fans of why they're in a good spot at 14 with the run on quarterbacks, receivers, some corners, and Pitts and a couple offensive linemen? Why are they in a prime spot at 14?
Well, I mean, look, they're going to have potentially an opportunity to get the best edge rusher in the draft if that's what they're looking to do. They could get at least who they have as the highest rated edge rusher. That's going to be an opportunity for them right there. You look at the linebacker position. If they wanted to reinforce that, you get the best linebacker in the draft at that point in time. There's a chance that Parsons could be there if you wanted to go there. So there's going to be really good defensive options. I also think along the offensive line, I've mentioned his name a little bit, but Vera Tucker's he's one of my favorite players in the whole draft, and he can play darn near anywhere. I think he's going to be an all-pro guard. He can hold up at tackle if you wanted him to, but you want to get better along that offensive line. I think he's like one of the cleanest, safest picks in the whole draft. So there's just some examples of the Vikings are going to have the pick of the litter at some of these positions, and they're in a really good spot.
Thank you. To media that just joined us on the call, again, if you would like to raise your ask a question, please utilize the raised hand function. And if you are experiencing some audio or visual difficulties, please switch your view to the speaker view. Our next question comes from Eric Branch. Eric, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, what Kiana asked was kind of what I wanted to explore. And I know you're like, dude, I just answered the question.
No, you're
good. But I guess more specific about Shanahan's personality. He's obviously very confident. Would you view the Mac Jones pick there as Kyle being confident, bordering on arrogant, that I just need someone to follow instructions and run the offense. And he's that, and that's all we need. And, would it be kind of a stubbornness of, no, I'm not going, I don't need to join the trend with these other type of quarterbacks. I don't need to expand the offense. I don't need to add these various wrinkles. I know that comes off as somewhat negative the way I've couched it. But anyway, do you think there's anything to that, or is that a little bit much?
No, I look, I think if you talk to some people around the league, they would say, if they take Mac Jones, that's an arrogant decision. That's just believing so much in your system that it is, I've used the line you always hear, it's about the Jimmies and Joes, not the X's and O's. That would be it's an X's and O's decision. It is, I believe so much in the X's and O's. I need somebody that can just see the game through my eyes and make those decisions. But I don't call it arrogance, because I don't know how you argue with them. You watch the tape every week of these teams, and Kyle gets guys more open than anybody else in the league. And there's a reason why so many teams are picking off all the guys from his tree to run that offense, because it's the best offense there is. My thing that, and I don't know, I didn't mention this earlier, and I give my my Move the Six buddy Bucky Brooks a lot of credit on this, because he's brought up the fact that if you take Mac Jones for the Niners, and we agree that he's going to be a fit and he's going to play well there, but I don't know how you can make a case that you don't have the fourth best quarterback in that division, and it's going to be that way for the foreseeable future. And I've kind of added on to that to say, you've got the Rams are going to be running the same exact offense with Matthew Stafford, whose ability to he just can make plays that Mac's not going to be able to make. So you're going to have to be better at all these other positions. And they're in a good spot, but that's where I struggle with it, is that, do I think whoever the 49ers pick, is he going to be successful? Yes, because Kyle is so good. The roster's so good. They're going to plug him in and they're going to be good. But I just look at it and say, man, Trey Lance or Justin Fields could do, what we saw, when Aaron Rodgers, and you saw him plugged into that system and you saw him go, okay, Aaron's always been good, but now we have a great offense with an elite player at that position. I think you're going to see it with Stafford, in a great system with an elite quarterback. You've seen it with Mahomes, with Andy Reid. When you pair those up, I mean, an elite play caller and a good quarterback, you can win a Super Bowl. An elite play caller and an elite quarterback, you can become a dynasty. And that's why I would lean in the other direction.
Next question comes from D. Orlando Ledbetter. D, you may ask your question.
Hey, I know you might have touched on the Falcons situation, but if the quarterbacks go, Jones, are you inclined to take Fields at that point, or do you take the tight end or the big tackle?
Well, I would again, it's like a Trey Lance pep rally, but if Mac Jones goes 3 and I'm the Falcons, I would take Trey Lance. I'd be okay if they took the tight end. You take Pitts. I think he's the second best player in the draft. He'll be dynamic, and I think for the next couple years with Matt Ryan, you'll have a lot of success. I don't know that roster's ready to win a Super Bowl right now, but to me, if I'm looking at the long term for the organization, what's the best decision? For my money, it would be to take Trey Lance or Justin Fields and have that next guy. Now, he might not get on the field much for 2 years with Matt Ryan, and I'm sure Matt would be frustrated about bringing in another quarterback. And I do hear from a lot of folks that Arthur Smith is rightfully so very high on Matt Ryan for the next few years. But if they make the decision for next year and the year after, you take Pitts. If you're making the decision for the future of the franchise, which extends beyond the decade, to me, I think the smart thing to do would be able to get that next quarterback and have him in the pipeline and ready to go. So those are the things there. And then the other option is, man, I think you're going to get a lot of opportunities, I would expect, because everybody I talk to outside the top 10 all is curious of where Pitts is going to go. And usually that means they'd be interested in moving up for him if they did have an opportunity. I'm sure they'll have opportunities to get out of there if they'd like.
And just to follow up, how are you stacking the safeties? It's a pretty interesting group, and how's LeCount from Georgia fitting in there after his injury this year?
That's a good question. So I just did this last weekend. I have my top 150 will come out next week, but I went through and stacked all the positions. So my safeties, I have it Merrick from TCU, Javon Holland from Oregon, Richie Grant from UCF, Then I have Divine Diablo from Virginia Tech and Andre Cisco from Syracuse. Cisco coming off of an injury. I have LeCount right after Cisco. Now, when you look at LeCount and you look at him on the paper, you see the pro day, he ran a 4.76. And you're like, oh my, he's no way he's going to be the sixth safety off the board. But his tape is really good. And in talking to a bunch of teams that have all the GPS data, he plays like, if you're going to do the equivalent, he plays like a 4-4 safety. That's how he plays on the field. He had the accident, which you mentioned. I don't think he's fully recovered from that yet. Did not run well at his pro day. But most of the teams I've talked to are forgiving the workout and believing in what they saw in the player on tape. So I still think he factors into that. Probably the fourth round will probably be where he ends up going.
And next question comes from Jordan Rodriguez. Jordan, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, Jordan Rodriguez with The Athletic. Thanks for doing this today.
Sure.
Kind of a two-parter big picture question for you. Not factoring in some of the safety protocols and some of the league mandated things that happened in light of the pandemic these last couple of off seasons. How did you see scouting departments adjust or maybe change their evaluation processes? And how do you, what are some of the long-term changes you see that might stick with these guys in the future?
Sure. That, to me, the Zoom stuff, while they were a little bit reluctant at first, everybody I've talked to from the coaching side and the personnel side has really enjoyed the Zoom interviews because with the technology, the ability to share your screen, the ability to have 5 different 1-hour interviews with these guys. So instead of meeting with them for 15 minutes at the combine, you only had 30 visits where you could bring players in. So you might only bring, depending on what your needs are, you might only bring in, 4 or 5 linebackers that come in for your 30 visit where you can spend the whole day with them and get a feel for them. Now you can have 30 linebackers, which you've had 3 or 4 different 1-hour Zooms with, where you've gone over video with them. You've asked them, what they see, what their checks were, you can learn so much about their knowledge as a football player over those Zoom meetings. So that's here to stay. They enjoyed that process. Other things, I did hear the biggest, issue with the scouts was just not getting physically on the campus during the fall. And I'll give you a great example. I was talking to somebody that was at a quarterback pro day the other day, and they said they ran into an assistant trainer, on the training staff, which you're not going to talk to him on the phone, but you just happen to bump into him. And he happened to have been around, this quarterback and a lot over the last 2 to 3 years. And he said, I got more good information from this assistant trainer than I got from any of my calls or Zooms with, coordinators, coaches, head strength coach. So it's kind of those bump interviews, right? Whoever you bump into on the school visit, you might get some really good information. So that to me, not being on the campus in the fall, that was definitely something that they missed in talking to the scouts.
Mm-hmm. And then with sort of these major waves of data that are going to be coming available to all teams here in the future, how are you seeing scouting departments sort of prepare for that? Because I know some teams are beefing up analytics departments, but in terms of that marriage, that partnership between the two, are you seeing certain changes start to trickle through?
Oh yeah, it's happening, and it's happening fast. What you're seeing, and to me, you're getting guys that can get the information. Then what I've seen really kind of develop is you've had the information then would be a part of the personnel department, and now what you're seeing is you got the information, you've got the coaching staff and the personnel department, but then they're bringing in the training staff to be able to say, okay, when we look at all this data, and we look at the physical data, not just like the production and all that stuff, but the physical data, the GPS stuff, and to be able to say, okay, this designates a problem. This is something that we can actually improve on. It's really become collaborative between that. And I think the days of having kind of your data folks off in a corner, kind of just punching up some numbers and passing it off to people is over. The smart teams are bringing all these people in together and really kind of helping settle all this stuff up. I think there was a good article on the Rams the other day about that, about some of the things they've been doing. That's not unique to them. There's teams all over the league that have really incorporated all this stuff.
Next question comes from Scott Petrak with the Chronicle Telegram. Scott, you may ask your question.
Daniel, some of the top corners in the draft had dads who played in the league at a high level. Do you think that matters at all to GMs? Is there any kind of comfort level there?
It does. I mean, I think you're seeing it in a lot of sports right now. It's interesting. I'm a baseball fan, and you can't turn on the TV without seeing Vlad Guerrero Jr. or Tatis or Bichette and Biggio. Like, it seems like all these kids are coming up, and they've grown up around the game. So the transition is not going to be a big deal to those guys in any of these sports. They're comfortable. They grew up around teams and locker rooms, and they've learned kind of to stay. Most of the ones that I've talked to, they're more even keel. They don't get carried away with the highs or the lows because they've seen their dad experience all that stuff, and he's been able to kind of guide them through that. So, yeah, I think it's very helpful. We used to always have the arguments in draft rooms about, brothers. I think personally it's more valuable if you've had a father that's been through it and you've kind of grown up with it your whole life, as opposed to maybe an older brother who just, is a couple years ahead of you that went through it. I don't know. I just remember one draft meeting where we had a sibling who one scout really liked and another scout didn't. So one scout trumpeted the genes and how great the genes were. And I remember the line, I think, was, this guy's more Ozzie Canseco than he is Jose Canseco was the response there. So there's examples of at times it didn't work out. But I think the father-son thing, and this year's unique with all these guys. I mean, gosh, it's Surtain, Horn, Samuel, Molden. I've never seen anything like where we've had this many guys at one position. I think it's pretty cool.
Next question comes from Rich Samini. Rich, you may ask your question.
DJ, with the Jets at number 2, you mentioned a little bit earlier about how Justin Fields would be such a great fit in the 49er offense. Obviously, the Jets are running the same exact scheme to the floor. So what makes you think that you have Zach going over Justin? Why do you think Zach is a better fit than Justin?
Yeah, look, to me, it's not that they're not that far off with those top guys. To me, there's Trevor, there's a little bit of a gap. And then to me, I end up going with Zach as my number 2 quarterback. And some of those things, I would say the difference, I think Zach plays with a little bit more urgency than Justin, just in terms of how quick his hands are, how quick the ball gets out, how quick he'll make decisions when he has to. When he decides he wants to go, he goes. I just thought the overall urgency that he played with was a little bit of a differentiator between him and Trey and Justin. I think he's a more gifted thrower. You can make it a case just as a thrower, that some people would take him over Trevor just as a pure thrower from every, as you guys have all seen, from every platform, from every arm angle. He can just do some unique things. So that to me is why I have him up there at number 2. Do I wish he was a little bit bigger and sturdier? Sure. That's definitely a feather in the cap for the other 3 guys. But this kid's throwing ability is pretty unique. There's not many guys that can make some of the throws that you see Zach make. And I think that's kind of where the game has gone. And I think he fits in beautifully into that system. I think Justin and Trey, I think that would, add a little twist to that offense. I think what Zach can do in here is going to be pretty remarkable. It is he was built to kind of play in this system with the stretch boot and all that stuff. And again, just sitting back there, some of the quickest hands I've seen from a quarterback prospect. When the ball separates from his left hand, just look at the time between when it separates from his left hand and when the ball is out. It's pretty impressive.
Next one comes from Ed Valentine. Ed, you may ask your question.
2 areas for the New York Giants that are, under real consideration: wide receiver and edge rusher, whether they go, edge late, in round 2 or whatever. When you look at wide receiver, you see Waddle or Smith as a better fit for the Giants, and which edge guys do you really see fit that Patrick Graham scheme?
So for me, when you start with the wideouts of who would fit better there, I mean, it's splitting hairs. I mean, I have Waddle over Devontae Smith, but you could say, okay, well, they've got, with Slayton, he can kind of stretch the field a little bit. I think Devontae Smith would give you that pure route runner that can just going to be able to uncover and win on third downs and be kind of Daniel Jones' best friend. So I love Waddle. I could make a case for Smith. To me, you're you're really kind of just splitting hairs there. I don't think there's a bad decision to be made. I would probably just stick with the way that I have them stacked, which is I have Waddle over Devontae Smith. And then when you look at edge rushers, guys that could kind of fit there in what they do. Oh, gosh. I mean, to me, Kwity Paye would give them a little bit more juice and kind of a fastball off the edge. Kind of complement the guys that they have. Greg Rousseau with his length and size, it could do a lot of things. I think with him, you're going to be able to let him, sub rush inside and do some unique things. But just as a pure edge guy, yeah, I mean, I would probably be looking at Kwity as a really good fit there. It might be too early for some teams to do that. Maybe that's a trade back, which I saw Gettleman did say the other day that was a possibility. I'm not buying it. I think we'll see a right turn in a NASCAR race before we see Dave Gettleman trade back. So I don't see that happening.
Next question comes from George Stoya. George, you may ask your question.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel. You already talked about the Broncos and the quarterback situation that they're in right now. But let's say that they don't take a quarterback, or maybe the one they want isn't there at number 9. It looks like they would maybe target an offensive tackle, a linebacker, or a corner. Which of those 3 positions, if you were in the Broncos' shoes, would you target? And then maybe who's a guy at each of those spots that you think would fit well in Denver?
I would love to get one of the tackles, and I have Slater over Sewell, but I really like both of them. Again, I feel like there's some of these, it'd be easy to just say this guy's going to be great and this guy's going to stink, like this like black and white universe where you can say you only take this player, he's the only one that's going to work. I think Slater and Sewell are both going to be really good, and I think both of them would fit with just about any team. Slater gives you the versatility where you probably play any of the 5 spots. Sewell is going to be, I saw he's doing some work on the right side just to get comfortable taking some sets over there. I would imagine with Bowles kind of coming around and playing the way he did last year, that Sewell just plugs right in at right tackle and off you go. But those would be, if you're not comfortable with one of those quarterbacks being an upgrade, that would be a place that I would look. I know they've added to the corner position, but to me, I think that's, there's going to be good player there as well.
Next question comes from Mary Kay Cabot. Mary, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, just wondering if you were still working for the Browns, and I saw that you had in your mock, I saw that you had him, Davis at number 26. Knowing that the Browns just added Jadeveon Clowney, who would you go with at number 26 in the event you had some good edge rushers, some good cornerbacks, and some good wide receivers still available, maybe one at each of those positions ranked equally?
Yeah, that's a good one, Mary Kay. To me, I'm excited about Clowney coming there. Obviously, his career's been defined by more disruption than production. But with the injury history being what it has been, his presence is not going to stop me from taking an edge rusher. If you feel like you have an edge rusher there that's an upgrade, do it. You can't have too many. So again, Joe Tryon is probably one that will be in that range for me. I think he'd be a great fit there. I've mentioned Rousseau, who could slide a little bit. I think he would be a great fit there as well. Linebacker wise, they're in a sweet spot. Jamin Davis is one of my favorite players in the draft. I think when you look at the Tulsa linebacker, he's probably going to be gone. He's getting some buzz as we're kind of coming down through the process. He reminds me of Anthony Barr, so I think Zaven Collins is probably gone. But Bolton from Missouri is worthy of going there, who can really run, is a good player. So those are like some really good options. I don't know there's a bad one. And then receiver wise, I think, unfortunately with Terrace Marshall's had some medical stuff that popped at the combine. So I think that could cause him to slide a little bit. I think Rashad Bateman is probably going to be that guy that goes in that range, late 1, early 2. A different style of receiver is Elijah Moore, who's undersized, but he's one of my favorite guys because he can do so many different things. He's exciting. But I was just talking about this the other day, Mary Kay. I know I'm supposed to be answering questions, but I'm going to ask you one. Because we were just talking, I was talking with a team the other day, and we brought up the Julio Jones trade. And I think that the Falcons were picking right around where the Browns were picking when they made that bold move. They thought they were close, and they went all the way up. And I was just thinking of, okay, well, if the Cleveland Browns were going to do something like that and try and put the kind of finishing touch on this roster, who would that be? And I know they paid Hooper, but I'm like, man, if Kyle Pitts was there at 7 and you're the Cleveland Browns and you want to mortgage a bunch of stuff to go get somebody, he would be fun. But I'd be curious to know who you would target on that, or who you would think the Browns, what position they could look at if they wanted to be bold in this draft.
Oh boy, that's interesting. I mean, I could see the receiver position just because they have to start planning ahead for life after Odell and Jarvis. So that is one way they could go. But I don't see a big bold move up into the top 10 or anything like that.
All right, you didn't want to play the game, Mary Kay. All right, it's fine. I'm just hoping. I want some excitement on draft night. I need somebody to make some bold, crazy move. So maybe it won't be the Browns. That's okay.
Next question comes from Nathan Baird. Nathan, you may ask your question.
I have another quarterback question, kind of a big picture thing. As Justin Fields began to sort of drift farther down the projections, there was some analysis that leaked out that questioned his work ethic and dedication. Coaches and teammates have kind of come out to refute those takes pretty harshly here. But do you have any suspicion as to where those sorts of opinions come from? And what would you say to the people who believe that black quarterbacks are still held to a different standard, either by the NFL or maybe just by the analysis industry?
Well, I mean, I think, look, there's a couple different aspects of this whole thing. I always feel like in my job, all the information you get, you take it all in, right? And that can inform how you stack players, how you rank players. But you have to consider the sources of where it's coming from and put that kind of through the sifter to see, okay, what does this really mean considering who it's coming from? And then I've always made a point, and this is not about Justin, but just about any player in general. There's no upside in ever saying anything publicly that if you got negative on a player like that, because you might get one negative source who had a bad experience with an individual player, and you might get 5 other sources that come in and refute everything from that one person. I don't know what went on in their relationship. I don't know what their issue was. So I don't know what informed that opinion. So I've always, just as a practice, have just avoided, any of that stuff with any player. So I'm, you don't want to see it because it detracts from the fact that this kid is incredibly talented. Everything that you hear in terms of, his teammates, his coaches, everything's been very positive. And he's getting ready to embark on the biggest day of his life. So that's just kind of a personal choice on my end. And look, I never, in the draft rooms I was in, it maybe there's something that, I don't even know the right way to put it, but I'm sure I'd be naive to think that there weren't some racial influences on how maybe people would have viewed quarterbacks. I just can't recall in my 8 years it ever being spoken, or questioned in that regard. It was equal. We had, you'd have a white quarterback that had, an issue, a black quarterback had the issue. It was never really, I don't even know how to word that properly. It was I never noticed it in my time there, but I guarantee you that it exists, and I'm sure it still exists with teams today. But I hope we get to the point where we don't have this stuff happening anymore, because it distracts from the fact of evaluating these players, and that's what that's what this is all about.
Next question comes from Jennifer Lee Chan. Jennifer, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, I actually have a non-quarterback question for the 49ers. They have the 43rd pick in the second round. They do need a cornerback. Who do you think will be available there when that will fit into their system?
One time you cut out on me again. Sorry about that.
Which defensive back do you think they would target in that position at 43?
Give me the team one more time, because you cut out at the beginning of the
49ers.
question.
Sorry, non-quarterback 49ers question.
Okay, sorry about cool. So for the 49ers at 43, some of the different areas I looked at for them, let's see here. What did I have for the Niners? Yeah, you're looking at corners, any type of D lineman. To me, when you're looking at corners in the second round, you're going to see both the Georgia cornerbacks come off the board right around then. That's kind of the sweet spot for them. When you talk about Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes, I think both those guys kind of fit what they do in terms of their size and length and playmaking ability. So those would be two that I would keep an eye on at that position. And when you're looking at defensive linemen, again, I don't think it's a great, interior group. So when you're looking at some of the edge rushers, Peyton Turner, Ronnie Perkins, Those guys kind of in that mix. We'll see if one of those bigger guys were to slide. I don't think they would get all the way down there. But Tryon, Peyton Turner, Ronnie Perkins, those would be kind of three names I'd keep an eye on.
Next question comes from John Crick. John, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel. I'm wondering if three of the top Canadians in this class helped themselves at their pro days with some pretty impressive numbers. One by one, if I can go, starting with Oregon. Devon Holland, he had a 4.46 and a 10.6 broad jump.
Yeah, he's my second safety, and I think he goes in the top 50. So, yeah, that definitely helped his cause at 207 pounds to run 4.46. He can play as the high safety. He can play as a nickel. So he can do a lot of different things. So, yeah, he helped himself.
How about Minnesota corner Benjamin St. Juste with that 3.96 shuttle and 6.63 3-cone?
Yep, another one who's kind of everybody's mid-round favorite big corner. So we have a couple of those guys this year. To me, he's in talking to teams around the league. Him and Melifonwu were kind of the interesting ones. Melifonwu from Syracuse. Again, I think St. Juste probably goes in the third or fourth round.
And finally, did Oklahoma State running back Chuba Hubbard help himself with that 4.48 40, or was that just expected?
He was a little bit faster than I thought. So yeah, no, I think he did help himself. He's for me, I ended up with Hubbard. Where is he on here? Hubbard ended up being my 8th running back. So again, that probably puts him in the third, fourth round range, right around there.
Next one comes from Bob McManaman. Bob, you may ask your question.
DJ, if you're the Cardinals at 16 and the top 3 receivers are off the board, probably as expected, and the top 2 corners are gone, can you see somebody falling there unexpectedly? And if so, or if not, who would you take if you're the Cardinals then?
Well, to me, you look at, Elijah Vera Tucker would be another one I've talked about earlier. If all those guys end up going ahead, then he could be somebody that could be in play there, which I think would be a great fit for them to just plug in. Safety, to me, like Merrick from TCU is the best safety in the draft. Now, that's right about where I have him. Maybe he's a little bit lower than that. I'll pull up my list here and see where I ended up with him. He is, he is my 19th player. So, that's right around range. He's like a double off the wall. Ozzie Newsome used to always say that, you get carried away in the first round trying to hit home runs and swing for the fences. There's nothing wrong with a double. And Merrick, to me, if you got wiped out at wide out, that's not a bad way to go.
Would you consider Caleb Farley that high?
Well, that's all purely medical, so he's had a couple back procedures. If you are comfortable with him medically, he was like my 5th or 6th player in the draft. He's a freak show. I was around Chris McAllister. That's who he reminded me of. So he's a big time talent. That just comes down to your doctors and how what their comfort level is with him physically. If they give you the okay and he passes, shoot, that'd be a home run pick if he shows up and he's healthy.
Next question comes from Tim Bilek. Tim, you may ask your question.
Just to follow up on Farley, I know you had him high. I think it was as high as 5th on the previous board. You have him drop into 17. Obviously, I'm sure the back surgery has a lot to do with it. Kind of a 2-part, I guess. First part, do you think is it simply just about the back surgery, or do you think timing also kind of plays into it, that teams really haven't gotten the best look at him, that he didn't work out, and that maybe if he had it 2 months earlier, or if he was able to have it earlier, maybe wouldn't have affected his stock. And 2, if he slides to, say, 17, 18, 19 before the Bears, before the Colts, before the Titans, if you're the Browns, would you be willing to gamble and move up to get a player like him?
Yeah, I mean, Tim, it's a good question. It just is purely, medical. In terms of the background on it, the timing wasn't ideal. Obviously you wish you could have had that procedure done a little bit earlier so that they could watch you move around and confirm that you were kind of back to what we've seen on the video, which is outstanding. I mean, he's got rare movement skills for a big corner like that. So the timing doesn't help. But if you're, if you're the Browns and your medical staff has done their work and they give you the clean bill of health and there's not a long-term risk and they give you the thumbs up, absolutely, he's somebody you go move up for. I mean, I think he's the most talented corner in the whole draft. So that's one of those decisions that's really not going to be made by general managers. It's going to be made by your doctor.
Next question comes from Mitch Stacy. Mitch, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel.
considering the problems the Bengals had last year protecting Joe Burrow, conventional wisdom says they take Penei Sewell with the 5th pick. Why wouldn't they do that?
Well, here's why. Because I think if you look at it, and this is one of the exercises you do in the draft room, is you'll take the 2 combinations, right? So if we say the Bengals want to come out of the first 2 rounds with an offensive lineman and a playmaker, right? So on one side of the whiteboard, you write up Penei Sewell or Rashawn Slater, whoever you prefer, at 5, and then you turn around in the second round and you say, okay, what receivers are there? Maybe it's Kadarius Toney, maybe he gets there, maybe it's Elijah Moore. So you're looking at that combination, and then you flip it around and you say, well, there's actually a pretty good group of tackles in this year's draft, and we could get Jamar Chase with the 5th pick, and we could turn around and get Liam Eichenberg, who we feel is going to be an upgrade over what we have right now, and has some tackle, guard versatility there. And they could easily look at that and say, well, we think we're still going to help him with the offensive line with Eichenberg. And now we've added a premier weapon in Jamar Chase. So we like the combination of Chase Eichenberg better than the combination of Sewell and, Elijah Moore, whoever else you can get there. So that's why you can't just look at it in a vacuum and say they don't take a lineman at 5, then they don't help Joe Burrow stay protected. You can still do that at pick 38, I believe, is the pick. So there's going to be good offensive linemen there as well. That's what goes into the decision.
Next question comes from Travis Wingfield. Travis, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thank you for taking the time to do this with us. The Dolphins made the move from 3 to 12, then came back up to 6. I'm curious your take on the thinking there to go down, then to come back up in that position. And if it was for one of the top skill guys, Chase, Pitts, Smith, Waddle, who do you think meshes the best with Tagovailoa's skill set?
I don't think that any of those guys would have any trouble meshing with his skill set. To me, Pitts would be, if he was there, I know, talk about wideouts, but he would be the first choice for me, just because he'll give him so many easy throws, and, you can just be in 12 personnel with him and Gesicki and just let those guys fly. In terms of the wideouts, Jamar Chase would be the best fit, in my opinion. I know he has history with the Alabama guys, but Chase, with his strength to be able to run after the catch, to break tackles, and his ability to kind of play above the rim, even as a 6-foot guy, he's just an all-around complete dude. So I think he's got to be 30 pounds, heavier than Devontae Smith. So you're just talking about a sturdier, stronger dude. And he's a more complete route runner at this point in time than Waddle is. So again, I think that's I think you're right on why they position themselves back up there, because that it doesn't point in any direction but that. Like, that has to be what they're thinking, is to get one of those dudes.
Next question comes from Luke Johnson. Luke, you may ask your question.
I know we've been talking a lot about what we're kind of expecting out of the players in this draft, but I'm just curious, looking back at the last couple drafts, if you could kind of put the Jeff Ireland picks on a page, what jumps out to you about this, the selections he's made or he's helped make, the process he has, just kind of what do you think about him as an evaluator?
Well, Jeff's is respected as there is. I mean, he's been doing it for a very long time. He's kind of a scout. He's somebody that I don't get a chance to visit with him on the phone, but I see him at pro days, or else in the years past, I've seen him for years and years. We always catch up at the Senior Bowl or at the Combine. But he's somebody that's always been just widely respected around the league, and he's going to value instincts over measurables, and I think that's served them well. When you look at their drafts over the last couple of years, I think it's some TBDs. Obviously, they've had some big picks. I think when you look at kind of what the future holds for guys like Traquan Smith and some of those guys, I think there's more to come. But that would be kind of the way I would describe it. Is traditionally he's at his best when they kind of go off of the instincts, as opposed to some of the measurables.
So next question comes from Charles Walker with Baltimore Sun. Charles, you may ask your question.
Yeah, hey Daniel. I know you have Owe from Penn State going to the Ravens in your latest mock. If one of those other edge rushers, fell a little bit, whether it would be a Jalen Phillips or or I guess Ojulari. I mean, would you see them taking those guys over Owe, or how do you think that would sort out for them?
Yeah, and it's fascinating because Owe doesn't have the sacks, right? And Baltimore's always preached production. So the fact that he doesn't have any production would say, oh, he's not going to Baltimore. But I think from a how hard he plays, and I think that kind of matches the DNA a little bit with the Ravens. And I think he did get a lot of disruption, even though he didn't have the production. I would guess Ojulari would be somebody because of having played in the SEC, having production there, having some explosive numbers. I would say that would be somebody that they would probably take over Owe if he were to get there. So that would be kind of the order that I would have those guys. And Phillips is a wild card. If teams are comfortable with Phillips, then with some of the medical stuff in the past, then that's he'd jump right to the front of the line.
Next question comes from Jamison Hensley. Jamison, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, thanks so much for doing this. As you know, with the Ravens, the one position where they have failed to kind of hit on that Pro Bowl player is at wide receiver. Overall, when you're looking and trying to project wide receivers, how tough compared to the other positions is that to project to the NFL level?
Jameson, I think it's gotten easier. I think as the NFL game mirrors more the college game, it's gotten easier to project what these guys are going to do and to get them on the field and get them being productive. In years past, you didn't know how they were going to function with all the stuff that was going to be asked of them in terms of sight adjustments and those things. But they've taken a lot of that stuff and simplified it. So I think it's easier now than it's ever been. And it's just one of those positions the Ravens have not had trouble anywhere else, but that's been a little bit of the bugaboo. But I think it is for them and everybody else. It's getting easier.
Next question comes from Jim Wyatt. Jim, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, appreciate your time. Titans picking at 22. They've got 4 picks in the top 100. What's maybe best case scenario for them in the first round, and maybe how would you attack some of those other picks moving to 100?
Yeah, I mean, when you get to the first round, the perfect pick would be, to me, if somehow in a miraculous fashion that J.C. Horn were to slide a little bit and you could scoop him up and plug him in. Maybe it's something where you can trade up for somebody like that. When you look at some of their other needs along their team, to me, offensive line's the way they could go. I think trying to find somebody to give them a weapon after losing Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith. I think they're kind of positioned where they're going to miss out on those top dudes. So they might be in a position where they've got such a good team and they're pretty close that maybe it is in their best interest to move up a little bit, maybe use some of those other picks to go get that accomplished. So that would be, something to keep in mind with them. Sometimes where you're picking doesn't necessarily match up exactly with where your needs are. And I think they kind of find themselves a little bit in that spot. Other needs for them, going forward throughout the draft, finding a tight end later on. I'm really intrigued by Tommy Tremble from Notre Dame. I think he's my third tight end. And he's somebody that can bring some physicality, which they would appreciate with the way they run the football. And I think he's got a lot of upside as a pass catcher. So that's just one other name I would keep an eye on that fits them.
Next question comes from Matthew Paris. Matthew, you may ask your question.
Thanks. Daniel, I was curious for Washington at number 19. You have them going offensive line over linebacker. Is that an opportunity cost thing? And then if they wanted to jump to the top 10, what do you think the cost would be to move up to 7, 8, that sort of range?
Yeah, I don't have my trade chart right in front of me right now, but that would, that won't be cheap to go all the way up there. So it's probably gonna cost you a 1 next year to do that. So I don't know if they're that close to make that type of move. Obviously the quarterback, if Trey Lance would be the one, if he started to drift, I would say, okay, I get it, be bold and go do it. Outside of that, I think, you probably stay back there. Offensive line over linebacker. It's a really good off the ball linebacker draft. So I think, you take a quality offensive lineman there and you're going to still have linebackers in the 3rd, 4th round that come in and help you. So there's good players out there. So that would be kind of my reasoning there on maybe looking at that offensive line. They've got to get better there.
Next one comes from Steve Megaree. Steve, you may ask your question.
Thank you. I saw in your mock draft you have the Packers taking Dickerson at 29. I was just wondering, they've traded out of their original spot in the 1st round 3 straight years. What do you think? What options might be available to them at that spot, or do you think they'll just be on the move again this time?
Yeah, I would bet they'll be on the move again. It just, to me, when you look at where they are and what they need, and you look at, kind of those early second round corners that could be there, you look at some offensive line depth, to me that kind of screams getting out of one and getting some extra picks. So they're a prime candidate to me to slide back a little bit. And when you look at some of the players, I've mentioned, as we've gone through this, I've mentioned some of the corners that those Georgia corners are going to go early in the second round. I love Asante Samuel Jr. I just think he's just a playmaker, and they're going to be playing with the lead. I want corners with ball skills, can make plays on the ball, and him and Jair Alexander, that'll be fun to watch those guys. They both play the ball so well. So that would be some names to keep an eye on there.
Next question comes from Arnie Stapleton. Arnie, you may ask your question.
I have a question about the fewer than 700 SRAs that were signed this year. Next year, I'm sure that number will go back up like near 2,000. Wondering, what are the practical implications of that, thin class, so to speak, this year and then going into next year's draft?
Maybe I'm just tired or brain cramped again. Refresh me on SRAs.
Oh, the standard representation agreement,
Okay, yeah.
Just the one measurement that, to see kind of what the pool of candidates is like this year. So far down from normal years.
Yeah, we had so many kids go back to school. And that's what's going to impact the bottom half of the draft. That's why everybody that I talk to around the league just says, we don't know what the heck we're going to do with our 6th and 7th round picks. If I can get rid of them, I'm going to get rid of them. Just because next year's class, those 6th and 7th round picks are going to be really valuable. A lot of those kids went back, so it's going to make next year's draft really, really deep. So that's one of the weird parts of this whole process is how that all factors in. So yeah, I didn't know that number. That's interesting. Not surprising though.
Yeah, I think it's 657 right now, and I think last year it was 1932 or something. So
yeah,
quite a big difference because of the NCAA letting them go back to that year.
A bunch of them did. So that's why, again, you're going to see a bunch of teams you'll see teams, I think, be aggressive in rounds 2 and 3, and they'll be parting with these day 3 picks like nothing.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yep.
Next question comes from Nate Taylor. Nate, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. If I could, I want to take you back to the 2017 draft class for the Chiefs. Everybody remembers it, obviously, for Mahomes, but nobody else of that draft class, guys like Tano Pasio, Kareem Hunt, Jay Chesson, those guys aren't on the roster anymore. Just how rare is that to look back 4 years later and say, a draft class can be whittled down to one player, obviously producing at a very high level to start the class and the rest of the class being a disappointment. Just what do you remember, if you could, about that draft class from a few years ago?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I remember more than anything else is, dang, I was way off and way too low on Patrick Mahomes more than anything else. That was my biggest takeaway from that. I'd like to have that do-over on that one. No, but the goal every year, the teams I worked with, was like 3 to 4 starters. Your goal is to get 3 to 4 starters out of every draft. So if you look back 3 years after the fact, those guys need to be starting football players. So some of those, like, they gambled on some upside there with Passanio. I mean, the Kareem Hunt situation was, that was unique. He's a really talented football player who's playing really well for the Cleveland Browns. But Passanio was just kind of an upside pick. And then after that, now you're talking about picks 139 and beyond, where that's a crapshoot. They went all in to go get Mahomes, and that draft will be viewed as probably the best draft in Chiefs history.
Next question comes from Mark Cannizzaro. Mark, you may ask your question.
I'm just curious with what your take is with regard to the quarterbacks, not just this class this year, but just in general. It seems like it's intensified with the rising stock of these quarterbacks, where certain guys, we weren't really talking about Zach Wilson, not a long number of months ago. And now, he's a lock at 2, for example. Mac Jones, all these guys kind of just jumping up, and the top of the draft is going to be all quarterbacks. Is there a worry about overrating these guys because of the position and obviously the importance of it?
Well, I think that's always the thought, right? And you go back to kind of the Gabbert year with Ponder and in that group. So I think everybody points to that draft. That's been a long time. I mean, to me, like the way the college game has changed and you've had these transfers and we've had a bunch of guys kind of emerge out of nowhere. When you look at Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, I mean, these guys were all kind of, no one thought they would be the first overall pick a year before it ended up happening. So it's just kind of, that's the era in which we're living. But when I think you evaluate the skill sets of these players, and I put Zach in there, he was injured in 2019, so that's why his tape wasn't as good, coming off of a shoulder and having a thumb. But when you watch the tape this year, like those are legit traits. I mean, those are definitely worthy of being top 5 pick traits. With that group that everybody looks back on, Ponder, I had evaluated him in that year, and I gave him like a 3rd, 4th round grade. Gabbert, that was those guys were elevated beyond their ability. I don't think that's been the case over the last few years. It's just what college football has given us, which is a lot of these kind of pop-ups later on in their careers.
And just if I could follow up quickly, is it at all possible in your mind that one or two of these guys after Trevor might end up being better than Trevor?
Well, I did an exercise and went through it. If you look going back to like 2011, the only slam dunks, in my opinion, of the guys that were the first quarterback who went on to be the best quarterback in their draft, you could say were Kyler Murray and Cam Newton. But I mean, you go back through the rest of those drafts, even last year, like Herbert, he stayed healthy, obviously, but he played at a higher level than even Joe did. Josh Allen's played better than Baker Mayfield. Mahomes played better than Trubisky. Dak has played, in my opinion, better than Goff. You've got Mariota Winston, which is a debate. Carr was better than Bortles. The Geno Smith, EJ Manuel year is what it is. And then you can have a conversation with Russell Wilson and Andrew Luck. So it's not a slam dunk. The first quarterback picked is going to be the best guy. It just hasn't been the case.
Next question comes from Jim Aiello. Jim, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for taking the time to do this. I was curious for the Colts that they have such clear needs at edge and at tackle, and when they're picking at 21. I was wondering, I mean, just given the talent and the depth of those two positions, are they kind of maybe better off trading back? And then like, what will be the difference in talent between a guy they got, 10, 15 picks later at those positions versus sticking at 21?
I think the edge rusher to me would make a lot of sense. If that's what you're going to do is go edge rusher, I think you can slide back because there's a clump of guys that are all kind of in there together. You're probably going to still get one of them. So that would make sense from a trade back standpoint. I would say on the offensive tackle, probably similarly. It's a similar situation. If for some reason, Rashawn Slater started to drift a little bit, I can make a case that that's somebody that you go up for. But outside of that, you get into that next tier of tackles. And I think there's, it's a flavor thing between, Tevin Jenkins, Darisaw, Raiden Zeichenberg, Cosme, all that group. Teams have them all over the map. So, yeah, I think that's a fair point. If that's the direction they want to go in those 2 picks, it makes sense to slide down.
Next question comes from Jonas Schaefer. Jonas, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel, just kind of a big picture question for you. Obviously, the Ravens are set to give Lamar a big deal. We see the same thing probably happening in Cleveland and in Buffalo. I guess, as you go from paying a quarterback just a couple $1 million a year to $35, $40 million a year, what kind of impact does that have on the office and just the importance of the draft as kind of this life source for keeping the roster well maintained and a contender?
Well, the Ravens, under Ozzie and Eric over the years have kind of figured it out in terms of volume, right? Having a lot of picks every year, which they've been able to do. And you hit on your mid-round picks and you don't pay everybody. So you end up getting the comp picks. So that's going to be even more important for them. Is to be, deadly accurate in those middle round picks because it gives you the cheap starters to offset the money you're now investing in the quarterback position. So that's usually a bigger challenge for other teams. The Ravens have been hitting on mid round picks for 20 years. So they're probably more well equipped and positioned to handle a quarterback contract than any other team in the league because they're so darn good in those middle rounds.
Next question comes from Anthony Wood. Anthony, you may ask your question.
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for doing this. The Texans need defensive reinforcements, but obviously won't be picking until 67. Who do you see as the best fit for Lovie Smith's defense? Or given the situation surrounding Deshaun Watson and the uncertainty there, if someone like Kellen Mond or Kyle Trask is still on the board at 67, should they be on the market at QB instead?
Ooh, that is interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to figure out what they would do at the quarterback position. Just so much uncertainty there. I would probably, yeah, I would consider, Kellen Mond, Davis Mills would be the two that I would consider with that pick. But I think you can look at some of their other needs, which there are plenty across the board for them on their roster. I could see them, looking at the wide receiver position. You look at the entire defense really needing some help. So I give you a name, 67, a corner that would make some sense for them. Let me throw one out there for you. Look, Zach McPherson from Texas Tech, who's somebody that's probably going to end up being a nickel, but has played outside. He's a really good football player who's got a lot of ball production instincts and just a real physical kid. To me, he kind of fits that profile of what the Patriots used to love when Nick was there and would fit them as well.
Next one comes from Bob Condota. Bob, you may ask your question.
Yeah, hey Daniel, another one sort of late in the draft, but the Seahawks at 56 and kind of the only pick they have in the first 129. Any thoughts on a couple of guys that maybe they could get there, and especially in a draft like this? I mean, what they can sort of do to help themselves? Yeah, 56. I mean, I guess Russell would be happy if he went back to the offensive line, right, and continue to invest there. To me, I just love Quinn Miners from Wisconsin Whitewater. He's so fun to watch. His Senior Bowl tape was as good as any that we've seen from an offensive lineman. So he's somebody that can plug into any of those three interior spots. Would be an upgrade for him. I think Creed Humphrey probably is off the board from Oklahoma. Josh Myers from Ohio State, somebody again that can play all three of those interior spots. So those guys make sense. And if they want to go with the big corners, where they're picking, I know he's got some stuff you've got to sort through from his time at LSU, but Kelvin Joseph, the corner from Kentucky, he's an incredible athlete. So he's an interesting one.
Next question comes from Kyle Posey. Kyle, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, just talking about the 49ers and their number 43 overall pick, and even on the day two. So there's a lot of opt-outs, whether it's Paulson Adebo from Stanford or Joe Trapp from Washington. How do you feel like the league feels about these opt-out guys, and do you think they're going to go higher than we think?
Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, we're going to have several opt-out guys go in the top 10. When you look at, Jamar Chase and the two tackles, those guys are all going. So I haven't heard anybody that's really been overly punished for that in draft meetings. Teams haven't viewed it. It's obviously a unique situation. They understand it. They get it. So I don't think it has any impact. I think the majority of them showed up at their pro days and worked out extremely well. So yeah, teams that I've talked to have been very comfortable with the opt-out situation. Adebo, I would have just selfishly liked to have seen because he was up and down inconsistent at Stanford that last year. Everybody points to the UCF game, and Gabriel Davis got him pretty good in that game, but he would have been one I think could have helped himself by, getting another year if we could have seen more of him. But I don't think he's going to fall anywhere below what he put on tape his last year.
Next one comes from Jonathan Alexander. Jonathan, you may ask your question.
Hey, DJ, thanks for doing this. You may have been asked this a few questions ago, hopefully not, but I'm curious. I saw you had Rashawn Slater at number 8 to the Panthers. If the Panthers were, in fact, to pick that, how do you view that as a pick, considering what they could possibly do at 8, whether that's trade back or possibly another player?
Yeah, I think he's really good, man. I think he's a high ceiling, high floor pick. So you're not going to miss on Rashawn Slater. He gave me kind of the same vibes as when I watched Zach Martin at Notre Dame, where I was like, okay, this kid can play tackle and probably play it at a pretty high level, but man, he could be an all-pro guard. And I think Slater feels the same way to me. So he allows you to get your best 5 on the field because of his versatility. And they've got to get better on the offensive line. So that to me just makes a lot of sense. And him or Sewell, I think, would be home run picks. I also think they're in a position where with some of the offensive line depth in this draft, if that's what they're locked in on, maybe it's a situation where they can trade back, get some extra picks to address some other needs. But they've got to come out of this draft with a couple offensive linemen that can be starters, in my opinion.
Next question comes from Zach Rosenblatt. Zach, you may ask your question.
Hey, Daniel. Thanks for sticking around this long. So the Giants obviously invested pretty heavily in offensive line last year. They picked 3 different guys. They didn't really make any moves on the offensive line this offseason. They're kind of like they're talking about, letting these young guys develop, which, they didn't grade out that well last year. But like, what do you think about that idea of letting these young guys develop as opposed to forcing it by, adding, reinforcements every year or whatever?
Well, I mean, obviously you're not going to replace Andrew Thomas. I mean, you're going to let him roll. I thought Gates played pretty well last year at center. Hernandez is still young. To me, like Matt Parrott he's like a swing tackle to me. Like that's where kind of his value is. And I know Solder's back in the mix, but I'm not, going to rely on that all that much. So if Slater's there, I would pick him. Sewell was somehow there, I would take him. Outside of that, I don't think it's something they need to force. And I get letting some of those young guys develop, but if you can get better, get better. So that would be my kind of philosophy there. They've got to identify who and what their quarterback is this year. So with Daniel Jones, to me, that first pick, even though they have some defensive needs, I still think at the end of the day, they do something to help him, whether it's the offensive line or one of those big receivers.
Our final question comes from Barry Jackson. Barry, you may ask your question.
Hi, Daniel. I know when I asked you last month who your dream scenario for Miami would be at 6, you mentioned Pitts. Who would it be at 18 among anyone who you think could realistically be available at 18?
Ooh, okay. At 18 for Miami, gosh, I would say Kwity Paye. And I know I like Kwity Paye more than some others, but to me, I think that would be a home run pick for them. And just the energy and effort to go along with the explosiveness that he brings. I think that would be a home run pick to pair up with what they do at 6.